Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Adrian, and today we're moving forward with our pagination feature. So, if you're just tuning in, I'd recommend that you visit the earlier part of this series first. We're gonna actually tackle the dynamic pagination numbers today. And to give you a quick recap, we already got the first, last, prev, and next buttons up and running. So, without further ado, let's get into it. First things first, make sure your React front-end application is up and running. You can run npm run dev in your terminal, and also check that your Laravel Backend REST API is running as well. As you can see, our pagination looks great. Now, let's add the dynamic pagination numbers. Now, open your pagination component inside the component's user data table folder and write a function to handle the rendering of the pagination numbers. Let's call the function renderPaginationNumbers. The name of the function isn't critical as long as it accurately describes what it does. RenderPaginationNumbers works as a descriptive name in this case. So let's go with it. Okay, in the function, let's create a simple for loop and store the value of the button we created earlier in an array variable. This array will be returned by the renderPaginationNumbers function. And I'm gonna call this variable PaginationNumbers. And make sure to initialize the PaginationNumbers variable as an array. To start, let's have 5 buttons appear on the screen. So we'll set the for loop limit to 5. Remember, in JavaScript, you use the push method to add a value to an array. In this case, we'll pass in the button HTML element we copied earlier. This way, we'll store multiple buttons in PaginationNumbers array. And in our case, since we're only looping up to 5, we should expect to get 5 buttons later. And of course, don't forget to make the numbers dynamic. Use the I variable which holds the loop iteration number to display the numbers. And then, call the renderPaginationNumbers function instead of the static buttons we wrote before. Remove the static buttons and replace them with a function call. So now, as you can see, we're able to display the pagination numbers dynamically. The rendering is controlled by our loop statement. On the other hand, 5 buttons might be too many, so let's limit the rendering to 3 buttons. You can make modifications later if you want, but for now, let's go with 3 buttons for the sake of this tutorial. Now, if we go to the console on our DevTools, you will see an error saying that each child should have a unique key. Again, React needs a unique key for each element in any loop statement. This is React's way of keeping track of all the elements when looping items. Now, we're at the part where we want the pagination number buttons to actually work. So, when we click them, they make an API request and change the list that we see on the screen. And for this to happen, we also need to pass in the fetchUsers function as component prop so that we can make a function call inside our pagination component. Also, make sure that you explicitly add the fetchUsers as one of the parameters in your pagination function. After that, add an onClick event to the button, and inside it, call the fetchUsers function. Make sure to use the backtick symbol for string interpolation. And then we'll modify the URL endpoint passed to the function by appending the page key to the URL parameter. For this one, we will remove the / from the .env file. As you can see, when we click on page 1, 2, or 3, the page changes. But we're not done yet. We need to make the pagination numbers move one number at a time and hide the other page numbers as the page number increases or decreases. This way, we can control the length of the pagination. We're gonna create new variables that will hold the data that controls the numbers displayed as we move through the pages. Let's call them head and tail. The head should always start at 1, and the tail should start according to the number of pagination numbers you want to display. Let's experiment by setting the head to 1 and the tail to 5. Of course, you should change the initial value of the for loop statement to the value of the head variable, and then change the limit of the for loop to the tail variable. This way, you can dynamically modify the value of the pagination buttons and control which page numbers to display depending on the page the user is on. So, you can set the tail variable equal to the value of the current page plus the number of pagination buttons you want to display. For example, if you want to display 3 buttons, then the tail will be equal to the value of the current page plus 2. We are getting an error here because I forgot to pass the meta variable when I made the function call below. So let's pass in the meta variable here. This looks good, but we've got an issue. As the page number goes up, the number of pagination numbers increases too, making the UI cluttered. We need to control the button numbers dynamically to avoid overcrowding. Keep the view limited as the current page value changes. So, how do we actually approach this? Well, it's simple. We just need an if statement before our for loop to control the number of pagination buttons. Here's the deal. If the current page value is greater than 2, we'll adjust the head and tail variables. In this example, I only want to display 3 buttons as the current page increases. So, I set the head variable to the current page minus 1 and the tail variable to the current page plus 1. Sure, let's add some comments to the code. I totally agree that adding comments to specific lines is super helpful. In the real world, you won't always be working on the same code every day. There will be times when you'll move on to other projects, and when that happens, you might forget what you wrote. That's where comments come in handy. They help prevent confusion for your future self. I promise you'll thank yourself later for this. And I'm really sorry for not noticing this earlier. This should be +1. As you can see, we now have the ability to limit the number of paginated buttons as we navigate through pages. And let's document our code. Okay, one last thing before we wrap up. I want to move the axios config variable to a separate file. You'll see why this is important in the next video. Just hang tight and follow along. And that's it for our pagination feature. In the next episode, we'll add the delete modal functionality. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps with the algorithm. And thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next video.